On May 13, 1985, Philadelphia became the site of one of the most shocking and inhumane attacks ever committed by authorities against their own population. A city, a community, and a movement were destroyed by a bomb, dropped directly on a house inhabited by members of MOVE, a radical African-American organization advocating for a free ecological life without the oppression of the system. 11 lives were lost that day, including 5 children, and 61 homes were destroyed in a fire that the police and firefighters refused to fight. A massacre. But what led the government to turn an American city into a battlefield? What is MOVE, and why does the story of 1985 still resonate with a cry for justice that was never answered? If you're here to understand the truth and not the narrative the system has built, stay with me until the end. But before that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now so you don't miss any details of the stories that the official history tries to hide. What I'm about to tell you now is not just about an attack in 1985, it's about how the oppressive power is willing to eliminate any movement that threatens its control. Don't miss this story. Who was MOVE? MOVE was not just an organization, it was a radical and self-sustaining philosophy of life, founded by John Africa. The organization emerged in the early 1970s in Philadelphia with a vision of going back to the roots, where humans would live in harmony with nature, away from the clutches of the oppressive system. MOVE was a response to a world in which humanity was increasingly disconnected from its essence, dominated by industrialization, racism, and rampant consumerism. Its members, with names like Africa, saw themselves as protectors of truth, freedom, and human dignity. They didn't just want to live alternatively, they wanted to challenge the established order that marginalized and destroyed Black communities. But by positioning themselves so radically against the establishment, white society, the police, and local authorities saw them as a threat. And any threat needs to be eliminated, right? MOVE became a thorn in the government's side, as their existence exposed the system's flaws. They were not just an alternative cult, they were a constant reminder of Black resistance, a direct challenge to the idea of civilization as imposed by the white elite. MOVE represented the cry of Black people who refused to be oppressed, a cry that scared the status quo. MOVE as a threat to the white status quo. With their ideas of self-sufficiency and resistance, MOVE challenged everything the system stood for. They were not asking for a small change, but a revolution in how society relates to nature, to government, and to the very idea of civilization. To the powerful, MOVE was not just an organization, it was a symbol of Black resistance, threatening to expose the flaws and brutality of the system. They questioned the social, political, and economic order, and by doing so they became a target. The authorities in Philadelphia and the federal government were willing to eliminate any movement that challenged white supremacy and the established power structure. MOVE's resistance was not just against direct oppression, but against the very concept of a system that works in favor of the elite and against Black, poor, and marginalized people. Their ideas about peaceful coexistence with nature and their refusal to participate in the consumer society made them even more dangerous in the eyes of the powerful. It was no longer just about coexisting, it was about building something new, something not governed by the same rules of exploitation and inequality. For MOVE members, the movement was not just a political issue, but a spiritual and existential mission. Rising tension, MOVE in the city of Philadelphia. The years leading up to the bombing were marked by growing tension between MOVE and the authorities. In 1978, a confrontation with the police led to the arrest of 9 MOVE members, who were sentenced to long terms for murder. The fact that the police had already tried to suppress MOVE previously intensified the organization's desire to protect itself and prepare for future confrontations. This was only the beginning of a series of hostilities. In 1985, the situation escalated further, with MOVE establishing its headquarters in a house in West Philadelphia, where they maintained a self-sustaining life and openly challenged the government. The police and the government of Philadelphia were ready for a final solution. The atmosphere was increasingly charged, with the city and local police seeing MOVE as a radical, dangerous, and out-of-control cell. Authorities believed a swift and effective police operation was necessary to eradicate MOVE once and for all. What happened on May 13th was not just an attack on a house, it was an attack on a movement, an attempt to silence a resistance they deemed unacceptable. And at the heart of it all was race politics, the struggle for control, and the fight for life. The tragedy of May 13, 1985. A militarized attack on civilians. It was a hot May morning when the police, with the local government's approval, decided to act. Instead of a simple siege, the plan was a military-style attack. Using a helicopter, the police dropped a C-4 bomb directly on the MOVE house, which was full of children and adults. The idea was to destroy the house and capture everyone inside. But what happened was even more shocking. The bomb caused a massive fire that spread quickly. The police's response? Instead of putting out the fire, they allowed it to grow, while the lives of 11 people, including 5 children, slipped away. The attack was a strategic maneuver to eliminate an annoying problem, but the human cost was unimaginable. There was no need to kill. The city could have been evacuated and the siege resolved more safely. But that's not what happened. The objective of the bombing wasn't just to eliminate a movement, it was to send a message to the public. Those who challenge power will be crushed mercilessly. MOVE was not targeted for being a physical threat but for being a symbol of black resistance that the system could not allow. The fire no one wanted to put out. After the bombing was launched, the fire quickly began to spread. What is most shocking about this episode, aside from the brutality of the attack, was the action, or rather the inaction, of the authorities. Instead of fighting the fire, the police decided that allowing the total destruction of the area was more convenient. The firefighters present to extinguish the flames were instructed not to act, and the fire spread, consuming 61 houses in the community. The massacre was a story of mass dehumanization, something that should never have happened in a country that calls itself democratic. The fire consumed an entire part of the city. But the authorities were more concerned with destroying a threat than with the lives of innocent people. The indifference to the death of women and children was clear. This event showed the world that, in an American city, the lives of black people are treated as less valuable, especially when they are considered a threat to the system. The fire was not put out, lives were not saved, and the trauma left deep scars in the community. The indifference of the state to black death. The most disturbing part of all of this was the fact that, while the lives of 11 people were erased and hundreds of citizens were left homeless, no one was held accountable. The psychological impact was also profound. Residents of the community who lost their homes faced emotional and financial trauma that lasted for years. Many of them never recovered what they lost: the home, material goods, but above all, the sense of security. The destruction of MOVE, and with it the destruction of their homes, was a cruel reminder that the power of the state can destroy lives without remorse or consideration for humanity. The city in many ways was never the same after that day. While the government tried to erase what happened, what was destroyed that day could not be restored. The losses, both material and emotional, forever marked the collective memory of the city. The legacy of MOVE and the quest for justice. Despite the attack and the attempt to silence MOVE, the organization and its ideas did not disappear. The resistance against police brutality and institutional racism became a legacy of ongoing struggle. The search for justice for the victims of the 1985 bombing never ceased. Family members and survivors, like Ramona Africa, who was one of the few people to survive the attack, continued to fight tirelessly for recognition, accountability, and reparations. The legacy of MOVE also inspired contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter, which still confront systemic racism and police violence. MOVE became a symbol of resistance against racial oppression and the fight for justice. Although the authorities in Philadelphia have never faced the consequences of the massacre, the survivors and activists do not give up. They continue to demand justice and keep the memory of the victims alive. In 2018, nearly 33 years after the bombing, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney publicly apologized for the attack, but many still see this as a late and insufficient attempt to repair the damage. For the victims and survivors, forgiveness is not enough. True justice requires accountability and concrete action to correct the wrongs committed. The legacy of MOVE is a reminder that the struggle for freedom and equality is never easy, but that, no matter how hard they try to silence the voices of resistance, the truth will always find a way to emerge. The role of the media in the cover-up and distortion of facts. After the bombing, the media played a crucial role in how the events were presented to the public and how the government tried to minimize or distort the gravity of the attack. Many media outlets, both local and national, failed to cover the bombing in an impartial or critical way. Instead of focusing on the brutality of the act and the innocent victims, much of the media coverage treated MOVE members as dangerous criminals, using stereotypes and distortions to justify police violence. The media narrative aligned with the interests of the Philadelphia government and federal authorities, portraying MOVE not as an organization protesting against racism and oppression, but as a radical and violent group. This helped create a climate of fear and misinformation among the population, which, in turn, diminished empathy for the victims of the attack. The government also took advantage of this distorted narrative, trying to delegitimize the movement and divert attention from the responsibility for the deaths and destruction. Furthermore, the media coverage was flawed in how it dealt with the suffering of the families and survivors. Instead of giving a voice to the victims and their calls for justice, many media outlets reduced the complexity of what happened to a simple conflict between a radical group and the state, ignoring the human impact and broader issues at stake, such as institutional racism and police violence. Over the years, however, independent journalists and activists began questioning the narrative imposed by the traditional media. The search for more fair and accurate coverage of the MOVE bombing became an ongoing effort to correct the historical mistakes of the media and expose the truth. The media also plays a crucial role in educating new generations about the horrors that occurred in 1985 and in the fight for justice for the survivors. Today, with the advent of social media and independent journalism, the truth about the MOVE bombing is finally beginning to be recognized, though much still needs to be done to correct the distortions of the past. The role of resistance in the continuity of the struggle. The MOVE massacre was not the end of the resistance against racial and institutional oppression in the United States. On the contrary, the brutal attack only strengthened the determination of many activists and organizations to continue the fight for justice and freedom. The resistance in the face of state violence, as exemplified by the members of MOVE and their survivors, did not cease but transformed into a flame that still burns strong. Movements like Black Lives Matter, which arose in response to police violence and systemic racism, carry within them the essence of MOVE's resistance. The fight for justice for the victims of the 1985 bombing has become part of an ongoing effort to expose and combat the power structures that perpetuate racial oppression. Even after so many years, MOVE's memory remains a source of inspiration for those who oppose police brutality and racial discrimination policies. It is important to note that over the years, many of the MOVE survivors have become central figures in advocacy for justice, such as Ramona Africa, who endured years of adversity but never gave up on seeking truth and accountability. The legacy of her resistance, as well as that of other surviving members, remains alive, serving as a reminder that the struggle for equality and freedom is permanent. The continuation of MOVE's fight reflects a universal truth. The system may attempt to destroy resistance, but the strength of the human spirit is unbreakable. No matter how hard they try to erase the memories of resistance, they will continue to resonate in the streets, in the hearts, and in the minds of future generations. The silencing of truth and the manipulation of public narrative. After the 1985 bombing, one of the most effective weapons used against MOVE was not just physical fire, but symbolic fire, the erasure of truth. The state and major media outlets at many points worked in sync to delegitimize the group, portraying them as extremists, savages, or irrational. Little was said about the disproportionate state violence, the children who were killed, or the fundamental right to dissent. Silence and distortion became powerful allies of oppression. This erasure was not accidental. It is part of a historical strategy. When the state becomes the aggressor, it also seeks to control the narrative to justify its actions. As a result, many Americans grew up never hearing about what happened on Osage Avenue, or never knowing that a U.S. city bombed its own residents. This kind of narrative manipulation not only protects those responsible, but also perpetuates the cycle of oppression. To recover and share these truths is itself an act of resistance. Telling these stories gives voice to the silenced and memory to the forgotten. Resistance as an intergenerational inheritance. The struggle of MOVE did not end with the lives that were taken or the survivors who kept seeking justice. It spread like seeds in the wind, taking root in new generations. Sons, grandchildren, and young activists, many of whom never lived through the horrors of 1985, now carry the weight of memory and the torch of resistance. This fight has become part of the DNA of entire communities that understand freedom is not something granted. It is something earned day by day. This intergenerational inheritance is seen in today's protests, in Black youth collectives studying forgotten cases of American history, and in artists using their voices to expose institutional racism. MOVE was not a final sentence. It was a comma in a long paragraph of pain, courage, and transformation. The flame of resistance, passed from one generation to the next, proves that not even the terror of the state can extinguish the truth. When one generation lifts its head, the next rises with even greater strength. Today, the MOVE massacre still echoes in the streets of Philadelphia, in the memories of the survivors, and in the deep scars left in Black communities. What happened in 1985 is more than a one-day crime. It is a reflection of how society treats those who dare to challenge the established order. If you found this story shocking, if you now understand the truth about the MOVE bombing and what really happened that day, share this video. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of resistance, the fight against oppression, and for truth. We cannot let history continue to be distorted. The fight for MOVE's justice is not over. Don't let this story be forgotten. If you were moved, if this video made you question the official narrative, subscribe, like, and share. Together, we can ensure that the victims of the MOVE bombing have their voices heard and that the system never again has the chance to erase the memory of a generation of resistance. The truth must be told.